Hey folks, blood typing can be a tricky topic. Sometimes you think you understand it and you get to a quiz or an exam and a little pressure and you've relied solely on memorizing A's and B's and AB's and O's and pluses and minuses, and all of a sudden you get really confused. So what I decided to do is come up with a little video to supplement blood typing and compatibilities. So the first thing I want to do is talk about how we determine the name of the blood type. So, for example, here in this table, I have the 8 blood types: A negative, A positive, so on and so forth. So, what do those mean? So, I have basically some rules over here that I want to go over. And rule number one states that the blood type is determined by the person's antigens, also called agglutinogens. I typically use the term antigen, but you'll see this term quite often. And these antigens are on their red blood cells. So, red blood cells we know are cells in the blood, they transport oxygen. They happen to have certain proteins, and these proteins vary from person to person. And we're looking at 3 of them. We're looking at the A antigen, the B antigen, and the RH antigen. So basically, you've got 8 options, all right? Different combinations of those 3. Whichever antigens you have, we base the name on that. So for example, if you only have the A antigen on your red blood cells, so that means you don't have the B and you don't have the RH, you're known as A negative. Okay, so the A means you have the A antigen. We don't have a B there in the name, so you don't have the B antigen. And then since you don't have the RH antigen, we put a negative there. Okay, and that's where students sometimes get confused, this whole positive negative for RH. Just remember that if you don't have RH, you're negative. If you do have it, you're positive. So if we go to the next one, A positive, what does that mean? Well, that means they have the A antigen and they also have the RH. So we put the positive. So you can go through these. So B negative, very similar, only B. B positive has B, but it also has RH. AB has the A antigen, the B antigen, and it does not have the RH. AB positive has all 3. It has the A, B, and RH. O negative has none of the 3. Doesn't have A or B, so we put O. Keep in mind there's no O antigen. All right, O means neither A nor B. And then finally, O positive only has the RH. So that step number 1 is the easiest step. You just say, okay, what's the blood type? What does that mean? It means antigens on their red blood cells. Okay, step 2 is to try to figure out what antibodies that person might produce. Now, keep in mind, you need to first clearly understand what an antigen is and what an antibody is. If you don't clearly understand what those words mean, stop right now and work on those 2 words. Antigen is something foreign that your body hasn't seen, and therefore it will react to it. All right? A lot of times we use that term antigen when it comes to pathogens like viruses and bacteria. So if you got infected by a virus, we say that that virus is an antigen. It's foreign, and you will attack it. So the body will attack antigens that aren't normally present in the body. Okay? Antibodies are what the immune system produces. So antibodies are actually proteins produced by your lymphocytes, your B cells. So the antibodies attack antigens. So we want to find out what antibodies people produce. So if we need to give them blood, we know what antigens they might attack based on what antibodies they will produce. So my rule number 2 is you basically take and look at whatever antigens are not on the person's red blood cell those are the antigens they will attack. All right? So they'll make antibodies that will attack any antigen that they don't have. So let's go up and look at A negative. So we already know A negative means they have the A antigen. Well, think about it. What antigens do they not have? Well, they don't have B and they don't have RH. Therefore, they will produce anti-B, so they'll attack B, and they'll produce anti-RH. They'll attack RH. And this should make a lot of sense. Okay, again, if this doesn't make sense, good luck. Because blood typing has to make sense to you. You can't rely on memorizing. So if you've got something on your red blood cell, the A antigen, you won't attack that. Because that would mean you're going to attack your own red blood cells. But if there's something that you don't have, therefore it is foreign, such as the B and the RH, you will make antibodies and attack B or RH. So when it comes to compatibility, one way to think about it is figure out what antibodies that person will produce, and you can't give them anything with those antigens. So notice, someone with A negative, if we just determine that person is A negative, we can only give them two of the blood types. We can give them A positive, that makes obvious sense, and you can give them O negative. So what do these two blood types have in common? What they have in common is there's no B antigen and there's no RH antigen. So notice, they would attack B, they would attack RH. What if we put B negative in them? If we decided, okay, we're going to give someone who's A negative, B negative blood, that anti-B will attack this blood and cause hemolysis. The blood cells break open, they release all this hemoglobin. That hemoglobin that gets released from the red blood cells causes major kidney problems and we could cause death. All right? So, step 3, or rule number 3, is when you're thinking about compatibility, you want to figure out the recipient's antibodies. All right, so you got to figure out the recipient's antibodies and then compare that to the donor's antigens. So we figured out the recipient had anti-B and anti-RH. Let's say we test someone and they are O positive. Well, can you put O positive into an A negative person? You have to figure out that donor, all right, if they're O positive, they're going to have RH. Remember, it's the donor's antigen. So if you put that RH into someone who produces anti-RH, you can cause problems. All right? So let's do a couple examples. Here's an example right here. We have a recipient. All right? You test their blood, they're B positive. What does that mean? Well, if we look up here, if they're B positive, that means they have the B antigen and the RH antigen on their red blood cells. But they're the recipient. So we want to know what antibodies, remember, we want to know what antibodies the recipient produces. So if you're B positive, would you make anti-B? No. Would you make anti-RH? No, because you would attack your own blood. So they only produce anti-A because that's the antigen that they have never seen before. All right, so they'll attack anything with A. So if you have a donor and you say, oh, we've tested this donor, they're AB negative, can we put AB negative blood into a B positive recipient? You have to figure out their antigen, which I put down here. They have A and B. So can you put AB negative into a B positive person? No. And the question as to why, it's because this recipient produces anti-A and you're going to put A antigen in them. So you cannot do this transfusion. So what you need to do to completely understand this is you just take some examples. You change up the recipient, maybe put O positive here. Change up the donor, maybe put A negative here. Figure out the recipient's antibodies and compare that to the donor's antigen. So step number 3 is the most important for determining compatibility. All right. Now, if you jump down to two of them that we often talk a lot about are the universal donor and the universal recipient. So what does that mean? If let's look at AB positive. So someone who's AB positive, they have the A, the B, and the Rh antigen. If you look at number 2 here, we want to figure out what antibody they produce. Well, they're not going to produce A because they'd attack their own blood. They're not going to produce B. They're not going to produce anti-Rh either. So they have none of the 3 antibodies. So if you don't produce any of the 3 antibodies, you can put whatever blood type in there you have. So they're known as the universal recipient. If you look at, and again, that's because of this. They don't produce any of the antibodies. If you look at O negative, the O means neither A nor B, and the negative means they don't have Rh. So their red blood cells are very good to give to people. So they're the universal donor because of this property right here. They don't have any of the 3 antigens. Now, what about O negative as a recipient? There's an issue there. They produce all the antibodies. So the only blood O negative people can receive is O negative. Okay? So you have to put a little time into this and use your brain a bit. You can't go and just memorize compatibilities. It has to make sense. And the most important step is that number 3. Now, number 4 is just kind of a sidebar. If you're negative, you should really only receive negative blood. All right, so if you're A negative, look at only negative. If you're B negative, look at only negative. If you're AB negative, look at only negative. If you're O negative, only O negative. If you're positive blood, all right, if you're A positive, you can actually receive positive or negative. Okay, so that's just kind of another rule I added there. All right, so hopefully this helps. Again, you got to practice. Kind of have to practice, determining whether someone with a certain blood type can receive blood from someone with another blood type. One other thing I'd like to point out, if you go to your Canvas course, if you go to Module 1, which hopefully you've been in there a lot by now, there's a document called Professor Koepke's Chapter 19 Supplemental Resources. Again, good rule of thumb, if anything that starts with Professor Koepke's, it's pretty good stuff. So if you go into here, and I'm going to be doing this for every chapter, just putting some supplemental stuff that I think is useful. There's a Khan Academy lecture, you can watch that, but I like this game here. If you click on this game, it takes you to a website, and it's the blood typing game. It's really kind of cool. It's kind of fun. So you click on play blood typing game. You have to have flash, so you click on that. You allow that. And let's see if I have volume. You can kind of practice. It's a good idea to practice on pretend things. All right, you don't want to practice on a human being. Now, obviously, you're not allowed to do transfusions, but you want to know whether you're going to kill someone, or you're going to want to know whether you're going to get questions right or wrong on exams. So you go to proceed, and you select patient. So basically, there's a little story, and you can spend more time than I am. But these 3 people need blood. So let's, first try to figure out what blood type they have. Okay, so obviously you have to take a sample of blood. Oh, and if you're a little squeamish when you see blood, look away. Ready? Okay, got a little sample. Now, to determine someone's blood type, you mix their blood with antibodies. So in this vial, there's anti-A, or the A antibody. In this vial, there's anti-B, or the B antibody. And in this vial, there's Rh antibody. So we have these pre-made antibodies waiting for us. And the idea is, if this blood has, let's say this blood is A negative, therefore it has the A antigen. if you mix A blood with anti-A antibody, it will clump. All right, it will agglutinate. So that's how we determine blood type. We just determine what antibody will react to the blood. So let's put some in there, here, and here. Oop, here. And you'll notice that this is non-agglutination. So that tells us that it didn't have the A antigen because it didn't react to the A antibody. Didn't have the B, this is agglutination, it clumped. So what that means, the vial had anti-RH and it reacted. So the blood must have had RH antigen. So it's not A, it's not B, it's not AB because of these two. It's definitely O because it didn't react with A or B antibody. And it must be positive because it reacted with the anti-RH. So we were right. Now we know they're O positive, so we just determine their blood type. The next thing we want to do is figure out what blood this person can receive. All right, so there's different blood. There should be 8, right? So there's 6 here, and then we click here. And, good rule of thumb, whatever blood type they are, O positive, you give them that, right? That's what we reach for first, is the same blood type the person has. Put that in there, and that was good. But you'll notice we need to give them one more bag. So, the next logical thing is, well, you could give them the universal donor. Could you give them A, B positive? Well, let's see. No. All right. But you can give them O negative and save their life. So go through, practice a bit. If you do this game a number of times and you're killing people, you don't know blood typing. If you go through this game a bunch of times and you're saving lives, then you probably know your blood typing. All right, so it's very helpful to know whether you know your stuff before the upcoming exam.